You guys know how passionate I am to see parents discipling their children in the Bible. And while it doesn't have to be complicated, it does have to be intentional. That's why I'm excited to introduce you guys to the Illuminate Bible series from my friends at Lifestone Ministries. This is a Bible curriculum that's designed to grow with your child from first grade all the way through high school. So whether your child is just starting to read or asking deeper questions about faith and culture, Illuminate meets them right where they are and helps them build a lasting relationship with Jesus. Each week, you'll walk through a simple 5-step approach. You'll look at a Bible story, check out the context around it, see how it connects to the rest of Scripture, study the theology behind it, and find out what it means for real life. It's designed for families, so you don't need 5 different books for 5 different kids. You can go through it together using workbooks tailored to the ages of your kids. So if you've been looking for a way to disciple your kids without adding more stress to your day, this is it. For more information, visit lifestoneministries.com/Heidi to learn more about this amazing homeschooling tool. Hey everyone, welcome to the Heidi St. John podcast. Today is Monday. I'm glad that you're here. I'm not going to be answering listener questions today because we're going to be doing something new here at the show. We're moving your questions to Fridays, and instead of having Mailbox Monday, we're going to have Fan Mail Friday. And so we've had a bit of shifting around here because of recent events that have been happening in the news. And today I'm going to be talking to my friend Patricia Engler, who recently visited the Pacific Northwest on tour with Answers in Genesis. She has written a book about Marxism in the United States, and I thought in light of recent events, we should probably revisit these terms, see what it means when we allow cultural Marxism to invade the topics of conversation on college campuses, and talk about where we go from here. Thank you guys for tuning in. This is the Heidi St. John podcast. Stick around. I think you're going to be encouraged. Well, thank you guys for being here today. Today's podcast is being sponsored in part by the Functional Medical Institute. You guys can find out more by going to homeschoolhealth.com. Well, it would be ridiculous for me not to continue to talk about the events of the last 5 days or so. Of course, last Wednesday, Charlie Kirk, who has been described by many as just a very, very bright light in the conservative movement, absolutely a national treasure to people who knew him and loved him. And the conversation, I think, now is going to be ongoing as it relates to where we go from here, both in our national dialogue and in what we're teaching our students on college campuses. If you're not keeping up with, and I think some of the very best reporting is happening on this particular situation over at the Daily Wire. I've seen PJ Media put some really great articles out. At the time of this recording, we were waiting to hear from Erica Kirk, and I would just encourage you to continue to pray for the Kirk family and for Erica and their 2 young children. But I want to talk today a little bit about where we're going from here, because Charlie Kirk died. Make no mistake about this, you guys. Charlie Kirk died because of leftist rhetoric that was spouted to a young man who became then radicalized into believing that he had a mission to kill Charlie Kirk. The inscriptions on the casings that were found at the scene, his online activity, the confessions he made to his family, every piece of the puzzle that we saw play out last Wednesday points in the same direction. And yet the left continues to refuse to face the facts. For them, the narrative matters more than the truth. I was reading this at PJ Media, and they said, and I quote, "Here's the reality. The killer wasn't one of us," talking about those on the right. He was one of them. You guys heard me say last Friday, and I'm going to say it again, the left in this country and the right have never been more divided. The far left and the far right, people say, well, you're so far left, you're so far right, you're left. Listen, the rhetoric that has been platformed in this country by the likes of people like, frankly, Jimmy Kimmel and The View and Jen Psaki and, frankly, Joe Biden and even Barack Obama, these guys have a lot to do with the way that this country is having conversations around political disagreements right now. And PJ Media went on to say the basic truth needs to be acknowledged. And until it is, we should expect more deceit, more gaslighting, and more violence from those who fed the lie that conservatives are fascists who deserve to be silenced. It's interesting to watch some of these videos that are coming out from young people on college campuses, and of course, Charlie Kirk and other people. My friend Kristen Hawkins, I just saw her on Friday talking to a group of young people on a college university campus somewhere. I don't know where she was. And they were laughing and mocking the assassination, laughing about and mocking the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And actually, Kristen just got up and walked away. And I think that was the right response. And these young people are yelling, fascism, fascism. She said, what is a fascist? And they don't even know. They don't even know what they're protesting about. They've been radicalized by far left professors in these universities. And really, this is happening to kids from conservative homes. You guys, I said it on Friday. I'm going to say it again. Get your kids out of public school. If your kids are in high school, junior high, grade school, it doesn't matter. The Bible is very clear that when a student is fully trained, he'll be like his teacher. And we better know who's teaching our children. But there are big differences between Marxism and fascism. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about Marxism, this worldview and a political theory that was popularized, obviously, by Karl Marx. At its core, Marxism argues that history is driven by a class struggle between the oppressors and the oppressed. So the oppressors would be people that control the means of production. They see the oppressors as people who have money. In other words, this is why you see idiots like AOC going to the Met Gala wearing dresses that say, eat the rich. She's a Marxist. They believe that this class struggle between the oppressors, those who control wealth and production, and the oppressed or the worker is the main problem in the culture today. And Marxism would envision a society where private property is abolished. We see this happening now in Mondami, who's running for mayor of New York City. And these people believe that resources should be redistributed so that everyone is quote unquote equal. But we all know that that's not exactly the way that it will pan out. Well, mostly it won't pan out that way because this has been tried before and it never works. Why? Because human beings are inherently selfish. We're not good at our core. The Bible teaches us that the human heart is evil. And David said the human heart is so wicked that no one can know it. And this is what we've got in the culture today. Cultural Marxism takes it one step further. It takes these ideas that started out as economically focused by Karl Marx and moves them not into just focusing on money and labor, but it applies this label to the oppressor and a framework that the oppressor came from. So culture, religion, family, morality, education. In this view, traditional values, especially Judeo-Christian ones. Notice that they're not attacking Islam. They're not attacking the Muslims in this country, which is fascinating, and that's a discussion for another day. These feminist far left women who are screaming for Sharia law clearly have no idea what they're talking about. We can see this all over college campuses today. But cultural Marxism has specifically targeted Judeo-Christian morality. It's targeted the family structure, and as we saw play out last week in Utah, also free speech. Why? Because these are seen as tools of oppression that must be deconstructed and replaced. This is why the left in this country does not want free speech. This is why, and I said on Friday, and I continue to believe it's true, Charlie Kirk was killed. He was murdered for defending a right that Americans hold dear, and that is our right to free speech. And the indoctrination of Marxist ideas on college campuses has obviously had profound impacts on our young people, and it will continue to do that. And instead of encouraging debate and encouraging intellectual freedom, many of these campuses have instead become breeding grounds for victimhood, where we see our identity not as victorious, but as victims. They're breeding grounds for the suppression of free speech and then even open hostility towards family and faith. And we see this over and over and over again. This is just another reason why we better be careful where we send our kids to college. It absolutely matters. So for this young person who was screaming at my friend Kristen on a college campus, and she was screaming that Kristen was a fascist. Well, when you unpack what fascism is, and these young guys don't even know what it is, they're connected. They're different worldviews, but they're connected. Marxism would believe that we're divided by money, and so we need to destroy capitalism. We need to destroy the rich. We need to take away the means of production from rich people, or actually, you could just replace rich with successful, right? We just need to destroy whatever is making these people successful. And I heard an interview with Candace Owens the other day. She was talking about her relationship to Charlie Kirk. And one of the things that she pointed out was that he was a very hard worker. He said, I might not be able to outfund the money on the left, although he really did end up being able to do that in many cases. But he said, what I know for sure that I can do is I can outwork them. And this idea that hard work is a value that that really has been lost, I think, largely in our culture today. Charlie Kirk valued hard work. And so a Marxist would not look at the hard work that went into building that money and that success and that business and that building and the opportunities that those people ended up having because they were able to build those successful businesses. Instead, they would just look at the fact that they didn't have that money themselves. And so really it's rooted in envy. And fascism, on the other hand, would say that we are united by blood and nation. And so we need to eliminate outsiders and dissenters. And the person that killed Charlie Kirk thought of him as a fascist and a Christian nationalist. I saw an interview that Charlie did talking about Christian nationalism. Someone said, you're a Christian nationalist. And Charlie said, I'm not a Christian nationalist. I would never use those two terms together. I would say I'm a Christian and I'm a nationalist. And this young person said, aha, I gotcha. You're a nationalist. Where's that in the Bible? This person who clearly did not know his Bible, who rejected the Old Testament and thought the Old Testament wasn't worth the paper it was printed on because Jesus had resurrected from the dead. And so therefore, we only should care about the New Testament, except for the Bible teaches us all the way through from Genesis to Revelation that we are to care about our neighbor, to love our neighbor as ourselves. And in fact, the prophet Jeremiah said that we are to love and pray for the peace and the prosperity of the cities in which we live, because if they prosper, we prosper. So we should love our country. And that love of country, that patriotism, it should unite us. But a fascist would go one step farther and say the things that unite us are our bloodlines and our nation, our national identity. And so they would seek to eliminate outsiders and eliminate dissenters. I don't know a single person who, and I'm not saying they don't exist, but I don't know a single person who loves the country and also wants to eliminate dissenters. Charlie Kirk didn't want to eliminate dissenters. He wanted to enlighten them. He wanted to talk to them. He wanted to have a conversation. Both of these worldviews crush freedom. They concentrate on the power of the state, and they end up oppressing people. They just use different excuses to do it. And I'm gonna play in just a few minutes for you an interview that I did with Patricia Engler, who happened to be here from Answers in Genesis. She's written an incredible book on Marxism. She talks about modern Marxism. But I want us to focus for just a minute on the fact that our students are increasingly being taught to define themselves primarily by their oppressed status. So that oppressed status could be race, it could be gender, it could be sexuality, rather than what this nation was founded on, which was the principles of individuality, right? Responsibility, hard work, faith, putting your hand to the plow and actually going out and tilling your own soil until the seeds that you plant begin to take root and grow. Marxism would suppress free speech. The framework labels opposing ideas as harmful. And we see this especially in the UK right now. The devastating laws that are being passed there against the people in the UK who aren't even allowed in some cases to fly their own flag because people see it as harmful or offensive or dangerous. This, of course, leads to cancel culture. Something that we've all been affected by in one way or another. Speaker shutdowns. Why do they shut down a speaker? Because they fear dissent. Charlie Kirk championed what he called the clash of ideas. Those ideas need to clash, and so that we can have open, honest conversation and let the best ideas bubble to the top. There's a reason why Marxism and communism and fascism fails everywhere they're tried. Do any of you want to go live right now in communist China or in North Korea? Of course you don't, because you see what happens. The other thing that Marxism always does on college campuses is it invites hostility. And we're going to be talking about this for a long time. The hostility that we saw toward Charlie Kirk in the aftermath of his brutal killing. But the hostility isn't just aimed at political figures. It's also aimed at Christians, aimed at anyone who wants to see traditional family structures in place in our society and sees them as the bedrock of our culture. And a lot of these young people that go onto these college campuses who actually came from solid homes. And I would say, I don't know much about the shooter right now. At the time of this recording, he was obviously in custody, but it looks like he came from a conservative home. And guys, I told you a couple of weeks ago in a podcast, if I had a nickel for every young person I know whose conservative parents raise these great kids and send them off to liberal universities only to lose them to leftist ideas. You send your gorgeous 18-year-old daughter to Western Washington State University, and she comes out as a blue-haired lesbian with a degree in lesbian dance theory, and then she wonders why she can't get a job. Well, it's because our colleges and our universities are broken. They're stealing the very foundations that once gave our society strength and stability. And so as I think on what happened in the last 5 days, I think we need to all remember that ideas have consequences. Words mean things. They take people places. And when young people are continually taught that anyone that has a different idea or a worldview than them are enemies of progress, it really does create this fertile ground for hostility and violence. Did you guys notice that in the aftermath, in the wake of Charlie Kirk's killing, the conservatives didn't take to the streets. There were no people burning down buildings. They weren't blowing up cars. They weren't storming the Capitol. We're not the same. And we have to decide what we want in this country. I hope that we stop being silent, because there is a terrible cost to our silence. If believers and freedom-loving citizens retreat from academia, entertainment, politics, and culture, Marxist ideology will always fill the vacuum. Evil will always fill the vacuum. And all it does is it emboldens those who see silencing opponents, even violently, as justified. I thought it was telling. I'm going to see if I can pull it up. James Woods, who is an actor, some of you guys may be too young to remember him, but he played this on his Twitter account.
We're still trying to wrap our heads around the senseless murder of the popular podcaster and conservative activist Charlie Kirk yesterday, whose death has amplified our anger, our differences. And I've seen a lot of extraordinarily vile responses to this from both sides of the political spectrum. Some people are cheering this, which is something I won't ever understand. And we had another school shooting yesterday in Colorado, the 100th one of the year. And with all these terrible things happening, you would think that our president will at least make an attempt to bring us together. But he didn't. President Obama did. President Biden did. Presidents Bush and Clinton did. President Trump did not. Instead, he blamed Democrats for their rhetoric.
So here you can see that Jimmy Kimmel, one of the worst late night hosts ever to exist on the entertainment circuit here in the United States, taking the blame and putting it squarely on President Trump. President Trump rightly pointed out that it is the rhetoric of the radical left in this country that's brought us to this point. And James Woods, in response to Jimmy Kimmel's monologue here, said this: "It was your unrelenting hatred of conservative Americans that put Charlie Kirk in his grave, Kimmel. You called us all fascists until someone believed you enough to kill a man better than you'll ever be. How dare you even say his name?" I, for one, applaud the honesty of James Woods in this moment, because we have an opportunity to rebuild truth and rebuild courage. Charlie Kirk said he wanted to be known for faith and courage. The answer is not to despair. The answer is to find your courage, to be bold, to be salt and light. We need to start equipping our young people with a biblical worldview so that when they enter into the world and into the marketplace of ideas, that they take everything that they hear and they filter it through the grid of Scripture, which is the only source of truth that we have. It's Jesus. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And we need to teach our kids that real freedom doesn't come from tearing down, but from grounding our lives in truth and responsibility. A long time ago, when I was considering what the right course of action would be moving forward with my podcast, determining what we want to do with the Homeschool Resource Center, my husband and I could have done an awful lot of things with our lives. And we chose to focus a huge segment of our life and our time and our energy and our money on creating an alternative to the public school system so that people here in Southwest Washington and in the Portland metropolitan area would at least have the opportunity to take their children out of a school system that is turning out kids by the hundreds of thousands every year who hate this country. Because Marxism is no longer just an economic theory. It is a radical worldview. It is a radical worldview. It's built on resentment. It's built on contempt. It's built on envy. And we see this playing out now in college campuses around the country. Karl Marx actually believed that the entire story of human history is just simply a power struggle. He obviously did not believe that there was a God. And according to Marx, the only way to fix society was through revolution. So you can't have a revolution unless you tear something down. Have you ever noticed, you guys, that the left in this country is very good at tearing things down, but they're not good at building things? Charlie Kirk was building something. Jay St. John has been building something here at Firmly Planted Family. Watch for the people who are building things, building coalitions, building systems that help and heal instead of hurt and destroy. And that is what people like Charlie Kirk were doing. And what we see on our college campuses today is professors teaching kids that America itself is evil. They teach that free markets are unjust, that traditional morality is nothing more than a tool of oppression. This is why you see so many people on the left speaking into the void, saying that men can become women and do not believe that there is such a thing as absolute truth. The other thing it's really important to notice, and I'm going to bring Patricia on in just a minute to talk about this, is that Marxism is evil for a lot of reasons. This worldview, and that's really what it is, hates the individual. What separates a Christian, or actually even a country that is capitalist in nature, from a communist country? In this country, we believe in individual rights, individual freedom. We don't see our society as simply just a collective. And you saw what happened in COVID when our culture and our society adopted a collectivist mentality. People were screaming at each other over ribeyes in Safeway because one person didn't have a mask and the other person thought that they should, for the public good. For the public good, and I put that in air quotes, people were spit on and screamed at. For the public good, our old people were put in nursing homes to die. For the public good, our schools were shut down. For the public good, our veterans and our servicemen and women were denied their jobs and pensions because they wouldn't take an experimental vaccine. All of this done for the collective. This is Marxism. This is Marxism. If you're not a person that's made in the image of God, you're just part of a class. You're just part of a class of people. If you're successful, you're automatically guilty, and we need to take your money from you. If you're struggling, you're automatically a victim, and somebody needs to pay for whatever situation you're in is somebody else's fault, and it's not you. And in so doing, we strip people of personal dignity and personal responsibility. And this is my big grief and my big beef with the homeless so-called crisis that we see in our cities all across the United States. We have sacrificed truth on the altar of a misguided mercy, and rather than hold people to a position of accountability, how did you get to be on the street? People don't just wind up on the street. Now, I understand that there are circumstances that are beyond our control, but the vast majority of people, if you go down to downtown Portland right now, the vast majority of those people are on drugs. I went into downtown Portland a couple of weeks ago for an appointment, and I saw several people. Sadly, people say they look like a zombie. It's called the Fenty fold around here, the fentanyl fold. When you take a hit of fentanyl and it disables your nervous system, and these people literally can't even stand up. And so they stand folded in half. And our solution to that is to strip them of their personal dignity by stripping them of any kind of accountability. We're not even requiring them to get help, which would restore their dignity and maybe help them get a job and get their feet back on the ground. Marxism hates the individual. And so these people don't see an individual down on 5th and Main Street. They see part of a class, of a victim class, and they seek to tear down the people that they think are the oppressors instead of helping the individual. And that's what's going on. Marxism is evil because it destroys the family. It destroys faith. Remember, it was Karl Marx who called religion the opiate of the masses. He saw the family and the church as obstacles to his utopian dream. Why? Why would he be so upset at religion? I'll tell you why. It's because both family and faith give people loyalty to something higher than the state. To a Marxist, the state, and this is why when you heard Tim Kaine say, I hope you guys were listening in, when you heard Tim Kaine proclaim just a few days before Charlie Kirk was murdered in cold blood, that our rights don't come from God, they come from the state, that should worry you. We have people sitting in positions of authority in this land, in the Congress, who don't believe your rights come from God. They think the state gives them to you. Marxism would seek to replace God with government and the family with dependency on the collective. What is the collective? The collective then would be the state. That makes Tim Kaine, wait for it, a Marxist. Patrice Cullors, the founder of Black Lives Matter, a trained Marxist. Black Lives Matter, a Marxist organization. Black Lives Matter, just like Marxism, breeds envy and violence because at its core, Marxism stirs up envy and contempt for anyone that believes differently than the Marxist does. It teaches people to resent those who succeed rather than aspire to succeed themselves. So instead of looking at someone who has what you want, maybe that person is doing well in his job and he bought himself a new Tesla and you're still driving your beat up Datsun B10. Oh, that was me. I could have been bummed at my Datsun B10. It was a pretty ugly car. But instead, I got 2 more jobs because I didn't want to stay in that car forever. Once envy takes root, it demands action. That's what we saw play out last Wednesday. That's why Marxism, wherever it's been tried, the Soviet Union, in Mao's China, in Cuba, Venezuela, it's led to gulags, it's led to starvation, and it's led to mass murder. Over 100 million people died under Marxist regimes. It's not a theory, you guys. It's blood-soaked history. And it's coming to the United States. Marxism undermines truth and freedom, and this is what Charlie Kirk was standing against. Marxism would say that there is no objective truth. This is why you hear people saying that men can become women, and whatever you feel like, that's what you should be able to be. As Ben Shapiro has famously said, facts don't care about your feelings, but Marxism would say that there's no objective truth. There's only power, only the classes, only the collective. And that's why on campuses today, speech is called violence. If you are on a campus and they call speech violence, you are on a Marxist campus. Because actual violence against the people with you that you disagree with is excused. This is why you see people excusing violence against the Israelis right now, who are fighting back against the takeover, the takeover of their nation by radical Islam. It flips morality literally upside down and on its head. And we are seeing the fruit of Marxist teaching everywhere. Everywhere. Young Americans who hate their own country, who tear down statues, who shut down free speech, who call Christianity oppressive, and in the most extreme cases, justify violence against those who dare to stand for truth. We saw this on The View. We've seen it in commentators on MSNBC and on CNN. Marxism is evil because it is a direct assault against God's design for the family and God's design for humanity. Personal responsibility, family, freedom, and faith. These are the things that Marxism stands against. And I hope that we take a really good, hard look at what's happening on our college campuses. Today, I'm going to play a clip from an interview that I recently did with Patricia Engler. She's a global speaker and an apologist who has studied the rise of Marxist thought and its influence on modern culture and written powerfully about it and how it is seeping into our textbooks, into our classrooms, and into cultural conversations in ways that I would say most of us don't even notice. So her new book is really unpacking how Marxism shifts the way young people view faith, morality, and truth, and more importantly, how Christian families can prepare their kids to stand firm in a world that wants to tear down what God has built. Hope you guys enjoy this conversation with my friend Patricia Angler. Remember, if you've got questions for me, I would love to hear from you. You can submit them to me by going to HeidiSt.John.com/Fan Mail Friday. We're shifting things. Okay, we're going to shake it up a little bit. And the goal is to answer your questions closer to the weekend so that we're not answering them so far out in advance because I'm only in the studio a couple days a week. And so again, that's HeidiSt.John.com/Fan Mail Friday. I would love to hear from you guys. Continue to pray for Erica Kirk, for her family, for the mission of Turning Point USA, and that this country would find its way back to its roots and back to the Lord. In the meantime, enjoy my conversation with my friend, Patricia Engler. Welcome back to the show. You guys, today we're going to be tackling a topic that I think is really important, and I have talked about it many times over the years here at the show, and that is the issue of Marxism. You guys have seen socialism creeping into the United States. We've got the communists now openly marketing their ideology on the streets of big cities around the United States. This is an issue that's shaping everything from our schools to our churches to the way our children are being discipled, and Marxism is literally everywhere. So it sounds like this dusty old ideology from the past, but trust me when I say, my guest today is going to make it clear that this dusty old ideology is absolutely making a comeback. Joining me today is Patricia Engler. She's a staff writer and speaker with Answers in Genesis, and she has traveled the world interviewing Christians about how they stand firm in their faith under pressure. She's an incredible book out called Modern Marxism, a guide for Christians in a woke new world. I love this book. It should be required reading, especially if you've got teens in your house or you just want to be able to see the signs of Marxism in our culture. I'm excited about this. We're going to be exposing Marxist ideas today. Patricia, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about you and kind of what got you interested in talking about Marxism, because people don't just typically go, oh, I know, I'll write a book about Marxism.
Yeah, it wasn't something that I expected, really. But first of all, I was originally traveling to document how Christian students keep their faith in universities. Very first university I visited in Canada, my home country, had this sign that was like, join Canada's Young Communist League.
Well, Canada's in trouble.
Yeah, well, really. And and it said like, because capitalism is war, racism, climate crisis, patriarchy, colonialism, all these things we're hearing about. That should have been my first red flag. But it wasn't until a couple years later that I really started hearing more about wokeness and how that's tied to Marxism. So I did another research trip, found all kinds of new emphases, or found lots of new examples of how Marxism is being pushed around the world. So then wanted to write a resource to help Christians understand how that differs from God's word. And on a hopeful note, what do you do about it? It's not just all doom and gloom. practically, how can we respond?
Yeah, I think that is something, and we're definitely going to end this segment on that, the hopeful note, because I think people feel really overwhelmed, particularly my friends in Canada. I've spent quite a bit of time in Canada speaking around the nation there. And I feel like, someone asked me to describe the other day, and I said, I think the Canadians are under siege, really, by this ideology. You said in your book, a couple of things that I highlighted, you called Marxism a modern day Goliath. Why did you call it that? Can you explain kind of the thought process behind that?
Yeah, I think it's easy to look at the force of the ideas that we're seeing today. And sort of like Goliath in the Bible, he was a giant defying the armies of the living God. And today we're seeing all of these messages that, again, some of them are clothed in biblical compassion, but they're really promoting a false gospel, defying the church and God and God's word, and promoting a different ideology that's very different from what Scripture teaches. So it can be discouraging, sort of like how the nation of Israel was very discouraged looking at the enemy that they were up against. So I think that's really where that terminology was coming from, is that there can be a lot of fear when we're seeing this pushback and hostility against Christians, but God is with us like he was with David. Yeah,
that's true. And we don't need to be afraid. And this ideological giant. Marxism really isn't a giant in that respect, but there's a difference. We hear now, we talk about neo-Marxism, classical Marxism. What's the difference that you see so that we can kind of be prepared to see this sort of new spin on Marxism?
Yeah, absolutely. So classical Marxism, this is really based on the ideas of Karl Marx, 19th century philosopher who popularized communism. There were people before him that were advocating for it, which I get into in the book. And his idea was that history is the story of class struggle between different social groups, so that you had originally things like private property and different labor market conditions that gave rise to social inequalities, which gave rise to class conflicts. So then you have different groups like the workers being the oppressed people and the business owners being the oppressors.
Eat the rich.
Exactly. So that was his whole idea, is that you need to have a revolution then so that the oppressed people turn around and take power back from their oppressors. So his idea was that that would absolutely play out with a communist revolution, where the workers of the world would get together, take back the means of production to be public property, and make this communist society where people could move past religion and government and the institution of the family and just share everything equitably in this communist society. That's classical Marxism. So then neo-Marxism takes Marx's ideas that society has two types of people, oppressors and oppressed, but then it expands the categories. So Marxism was looking very much in terms of the wealthy as the oppressors and the workers as oppressed, but then neo-Marxism expands that to
more
other groups. Yeah, exactly.
We create more victims.
Yeah, so you have like women and LGBTQ people in the oppressed side, and ethnic minorities and so on, whereas oppressors, European colonialist men, heterosexuals, Christians. So it's the same worldview that Marxism has, but just expanded and repackaged and reapplied with less emphasis on economics.
And you say that Marxism really is a false gospel. And so what are the core lies at the heart of it? When I hear you talking about Marxism, and we see this all over in the Pacific Northwest, and I think here these people are saying, we're going to take power back from the rich people, and then they're going to go and create literally nothing. Because there's a reason why these people have created something, they've worked for something, they've built something, and then they were successful at it. And I feel like one of the main lies it's built on is, and one of the sins really, is envy and jealousy. What say you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason I call it a false gospel is every worldview has to answer 4 questions. What's humanity's essential nature, core problem, redemptive hope, and ideal destiny? So we know from Scripture, our nature is we're creatures made in God's image. Our problem is sin. Our hope is Jesus Christ alone. Our ideal destiny is with Jesus in the new heaven and new earth. Marxism is a false gospel because it says our core nature, we're self-creators. We create the world around us. Those material conditions create us in return. And that our problem is that we've created these conditions that keep us from living fulfilled human lives. So we have oppressors and oppressed. The solution is revolution, take back power from the oppressors, and then the destiny is communism. So that's that false gospel. So literally all the elements of a worldview, but in this Marxist language. And like you said, the problem is that Marx's solution relies on sin. You're using basically discontentment and thievery to take back power or wealth or resources. And then the problem is you'll never create a utopia based on that, because it neglects that humans are sinners. Mm-hmm. So it assumes that humans are
essentially good.
Yeah. So that if we just have the right conditions, then we can all get along. So that's why communism fails every single time, is human sinners cannot create a utopia, especially by sinful means like thievery and their own version of oppression. Mm-hmm. So Marxism just perpetuates oppression, and we see that through history.
So we're watching this now sort of repeat itself here in the United States. It's amazing to me to see these young people on college campuses. You know, I've said for a long, long time that we have to get a handle on the education system in this country, because our institutions, our colleges for sure, universities, I would say to some degree now, even our high schools are turning out by the hundreds of thousands every single year, graduating kids who hate this country. And they hate the capitalist ideas behind the country and the very anti-God and anti-his word. You know, Ken's always calling the public schools the anti-God schools. Right? Absolutely right. And you have to remove God from these ideologies or they just fall apart, because you can't embrace what God says is good and follow this ideology. But you go on in your book, and in part 2, you talk about 5 strategic pillars of Marxist cultural subversion. You say it's institutional erosion, attack on the family, targeting youth, and child sexualization, which, hello, I mean, we're seeing this everywhere. Can you highlight some of the most alarming examples that you are encountering as you're watching these ideologies take root in the culture? Yeah,
absolutely. So those are some of the strategies that you see to actually make revolutions happen, and erasing history is one of those. So students are being taught kind of a neo-Marxist version of history in terms of all that oppressors versus oppressed. Whereas if young people actually knew history in terms of what happens in communist societies, I think young people would be a lot less supportive of Marxism if they knew that, for instance, in communist Czechoslovakia, young people were literally lighting themselves on fire to protest communism. Whereas now you have, there's a study of 2,000 young people, or 2,000 Americans, that I talk about in the book. And it says that young people, so Gen Z, I have to remember not to say Gen Z because I'm Canadian, Gen Z and millennials tend to have a more favorable opinion of the term Marxism compared to much, much smaller percentages of seniors who have lived through history. So erasing history is one of those trends. And the other one, there's a number of conditions that make people vulnerable to totalitarianism. And one of the main ones that I see that happening is what I call in the book trivialization. So that is breaking down people's essentially thinking structures so that people can't think for themselves.
Oh, so in other words, when we remove critical thinking from our conversations, when words offend us and we're not allowed to have a conversation, when words are violence, you can't have a debate. I mean, we see this in modern politics right now, right? We're yelling and screaming at each other, but we don't want to put two people with opposing ideas on a platform together, right? And so we're kind of stripping our young people of the ability to think critically and come up with their own opinion.
Yeah, and that whole censorship, like I go over in the book, like hallmarks of classic communist brainwashing conditions that were researched back in the 50s and 60s, and you can look, the parallels are very striking to what we have in our culture today. And 2 other areas where we see this trivialization happening, one through the education system, because students are, I say the 3 R's now are not reading, writing, and arithmetic, but radicalism, rhetoric, and recreation.
Oh man, so true.
Totally. Schools basically now exist to teach neo-Marxists, to disciple neo-Marxist activists, not to teach critical thinkers who can actually contribute to society. And we see it playing out in terms of mass media, especially AI. People are outsourcing their thinking, writing, decision-making, and research to that. So now people can't even come up with their own arguments. So they're just downloading information from AI and not able to think for themselves.
Boy, that's so true. I mean, we're asking ChatGPT for everything now. And it's amazing. Like, I'm fascinated, and I bet you are too, by watching some of the young thinkers of our time. I'm thinking of, Charlie Kirk and people like that who are going on to college campuses, and they're challenging the young people to come up to a microphone. And the vast majority of them can't hold an argument, and it devolves into name calling and that kind of thing. And it's very sad. And then again, it's stripping them of their ability to think critically, think for themselves. You just talked about it a second ago. You used the word totalitarian. A couple of things. I would love for you to define totalitarianism, and then define what you say is a soft totalitarian reset, because that's what you say, and I would agree with you, is happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So at its core, totalitarianism is a system of governance that results when someone or something tries taking God's place as the authority for truth. And we see this happening. Rod Dreher defined it pretty well in his book, Live Not by Lies.
Yep.
So he defined soft totalitarianism versus hard totalitarianism. So hard totalitarianism tries to enforce the new definition of truth using force and violence, whereas soft totalitarianism enforces that new definition of truth in other ways, either by luring people to prioritize things like safety, privacy, and freedom over, safety.
COVID.
Yes, safety, convenience, and pleasure over freedom, privacy, and conviction, like what we saw in the pandemic, and also through cancel culture.
Yes.
So anything that says, you can participate in society, you can have access to these things, so long as you uphold the community guidelines and go with our definition of truth.
Yeah.
And you see this throughout history as well.
Yeah. And so absolutely. I had Roger on my show talking about Live Not by Lies in the middle of the pandemic.
Wow.
I think it's the second most downloaded podcast I've ever recorded, because people were really resonating. We're like, they're asking us to stand on a dot in the middle of Walmart, and we don't know why we're doing it. And we're not allowed to think about it. We're not allowed to ask those questions. And if we are, then we're canceled, or we're fired from our job, or whatever it is. Or we don't want to take a shot because we don't know that we don't trust the science behind it, or maybe we think there hasn't been enough time. Okay, fine. The state then says you're going to lose your job. In Washington state, we just saw the courts, the highest court in Washington state just upheld a fine that I think it was Stuffy's, the name of the restaurant, they refused to close past the 2 weeks because they're going to lose their business. So they opened. The Supreme Court of Washington state now, several years later, has said, sorry, you have to pay the fine anyway. I think this is going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. But my point in bringing this up to you is it's that fear, right?
Yeah.
The loss of money, loss of your income, loss of reputation. That is that soft totalitarianism that you've been talking about. Third part of your book really outlines 3 foundational Christian responses. You say they're spiritual, intellectual, and interpersonal. Which one do you find is most urgent for young people today?
Oh man, that's really hard to pick, because all of them go together. I think the one that's probably most lacking today would be probably the critical thinking side of the intellectual foundations, as we've talked about, and that's strategic. But you also do see a lack in the interpersonal foundations, lack of mentorship opportunities, and churches don't help when they segregate age groups and don't let young and old people get together with that. And also a lack of spiritual foundations in terms of not actually knowing what God's word says and how to read it for ourselves. So you need all of them. And unfortunately, today, churches are often not giving young people the actual things that they need most. They're focusing on entertainment instead of discipleship, but there are some strategic ways that churches can emphasize those 3 things, which I talk about as well.
Yeah, and these are these counter-revolutionary tactics that you've given, from defending the family to legal discernment, loving our enemies. What are some that you can highlight for us in the last few minutes that we have?
Yes, for sure. So defending the family is a really big one. And also, I take a line from Alexander Solzhenitsyn about living not by lies. So one way we can do that is to uphold the value of every human life, because totalitarian regimes tend to dehumanize people. That's the last step of brainwashing that the guy who researched that back in the 60s, Robert Lifton, came up with. He said that at its zenith, totalitarianism basically makes itself the authority for truth to the extent that you define who counts as a real person with human rights.
Which is why it's so important for young people, actually all of us, to be engaged in the discussions and the fight for life.
Absolutely.
From our unborn to our elderly. We're talking, Canada is drowning in euthanasia.
Oh, yeah.
Right now, absolutely drowning. And you guys have MAID there, right?
I call it sham, sanctioned homicide actualized medically.
Oh, so my word, totally good. Yeah, MAID is what? Medical assistance in dying.
Death, which doctors are supposed to do. So that's why I call it sham.
Yeah, it's so crazy. When you see believers practicing these things, you believe, and I know, and I do too, that we can actually see change, that we shouldn't give up, that we shouldn't shrink back or just go, well, that's just the way it is now, right? I hear a lot of that. Where do you think that culture is going, and how can Christians follow the Lord and really expose some of the lies of totalitarianism and Marxism in the culture right now?
Yes, for sure. So first of all, standing on those 3 foundations, having them for yourself, and then discipling young
What,
people.
you can't pass on what you don't possess?
Exactly.
Come on.
So start with that, and then disciple young people with those same foundations. And part of the spiritual foundations is an emphasis on prayer. And that is, I think, basically our best weapon. That is how we can make a big difference. And you do see that playing out today. So I'm thinking of, for example, pro-lifers that used to not be pro-lifers, but people were praying for them, and God can make those changes of heart happen. So prayer is a really powerful weapon. Discipleship, basically taking all the strategies that neo-Marxists are doing and then doing the opposite from a biblical foundation. There's a lot we can do. So that is why one of the reasons I wanted to have this book available for people is to give them hope and strategy, and to encourage them to remember that Jesus is the victor. He has overcome the world.
Come on. Yeah, greater is he who's in me than he who's in the world. I love this. Is there a study guide that comes with modern Marxism? Tell us a little bit about that, because I want to know, like, what ages could we use it with, and would it be appropriate, say, to like put into a homeschool curriculum or something like that?
Absolutely. So this would be really good for high schoolers, especially. So as soon as they have that kind of abstract thinking skills and can comprehend kind of the critical thinking aspects, logic, fallacies, all those types of things, and really understand some of the heavier aspects of communism. So high school, absolutely. And then the study guide, there is that available to go along with the book. And it's designed either for individual, but ideally group studies. So you can do this with your family or with a youth group, homeschool, co-op, with your church, with friends that you pull together. A couple of families could go through it together. And you can go through every chapter of the book in more detail, learn how, come up with ways to apply what you're learning. I have optional challenges in there, dive deeper into, there's like reflection questions, discussion questions, really dive deeper into understanding and applying the materials. And you can make it your own. You can pick which questions, which activities you want to use. So it's designed to be very flexible and adjustable. And what I really like about it is there's prayer prompts. So like, how do you take what you've just learned and then do something about it through that prayer we talked about?
I love that. If you could leave a parting word, to Christians who are wrestling with the cultural currents that we find ourselves really standing up against, especially young people, what would it be?
Definitely to take heart, stand strong, and remember that Jesus is the victor. So I, in the very last chapter, I remind people that we need to resolve to follow Jesus unconditionally, regardless of whether he does what we would like him to or not. We can expect it will be hard, but we know it will be worth it. So it might get very dark, but stand the course, because in the end, we know, like the Bible says, our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So no matter what happens, stick with Jesus. He is the victor.
I love it. Patricia Engler, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's encouraging for me to hear from your perspective that this isn't an insurmountable thing. We know that the Lord is going to be with us, right? Never leaves us, never forsakes us. I'm so thankful for your courage in writing this book and the clarity in which the Lord has given you to bring the message to families today. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much.
I appreciate it. All right, you guys, if you want to go deeper, be sure and grab a copy of Patricia's book, Modern Marxism, A Guide for Christians in a Woke New World, and the companion study guide. I'm going to link to those resources in mentions today. Thanks to Patricia Angler for coming on, and I hope this is encouraging for you. If you've got questions about this topic or you want me to dive deeper into it, please reach out to me, HeidiSt.John.com/Mailbox Monday.